Have you ever met someone so important to your life that you would do anything just to keep them close? Not a family member, not a lover, just one person whose presence somehow holds everything together. What if I told you there was a man in Germany, a billionaire, who was willing to buy an entire hospital for one reason only, to keep one Filipino nurse from leaving his side? At first that sounds like an exaggeration, right? Billionaires buy mansions, private jets, football clubs, but a hospital just because of a nurse from a small town in the Philippines. Why would someone do that? The story began on an ordinary winter morning in Munich. Snow on the windows, grey skies, the slow beeping of machines in an intensive care unit. In one of those rooms, a man who had built his fortune in shipping, real estate and technology lay in a hospital bed, worn down by a long illness. His name was Friedrich Keller. To the world, he was the hard-headed German billionaire who never smiled in public photos, always in a dark suit, always surrounded by lawyers and advisors. To the nurses in that hospital, in those first days, he was the most difficult patient they had. He refused meals, he complained about pain, but snapped at anyone who tried to help. He argued with doctors, questioned every medicine, spoke in short, sharp sentences that left younger nurses in tears. His family visited, but only for short periods, always talking in low, serious voices about businesses, foundations, and succession. There was no warmth around his bed, only tension, fear, and the heavy weight of a man who could buy anything but could not control his own body. Then quietly she arrived. Her name was Maria LSE, but everyone called her Malu. She was a Filipino nurse in her early S, originally from a modest town in Ley. She had been working in Germany for several years already, while other nurses rushed past the door of room with anxiety in their eyes. The head nurse looked at Malu one morning and said in a low voice, "If anyone can handle him, it is you." Malu took the chart, read it carefully, whispered a short prayer under her breath, and walked into the room. Now imagine the scene for a moment. A tired Filipino woman far from home, stepping into a room where a powerful man is used to controlling everything and everyone. She adjusted her uniform, knocked gently and spoke in calm English. "Good morning, Mr. Keller. My name is Malou. I will be your nurse today." He stared at her, his eyes cold and tired. "Another nurse," he muttered. "How many will they send me?" She did not react to the tone. She placed the chart down, checked his IV, and then did something no one else had done in days. She pulled the chair closer to the bed, sat down, and looked him in the eye without fear. "You must be very tired," she said softly. "This must be frustrating for you." Something in her voice made him pause. Maybe it was the slight accent. Maybe it was the sincerity. Maybe it was the way she said tired, as if she knew a different kind of exhaustion. Not just physical, but deeper. He frowned. "You have no idea," he answered. "Maybe not," she replied. "But I will listen if you want to tell me." For a full minute, the room was silent. The machines kept beeping. Outside, another nurse pushed a cart down the hallway. And then something unusual happened. Instead of changing the subject, instead of pushing her away like he had done with everyone else, Friedrich began to talk. He did not talk about money or companies. He spoke about being unable to sleep, about the fear of dying alone despite having everything, about feeling like every person who entered his room saw a bank account, not a human being. Malu nodded, asking small, gentle questions. She never rushed him. When he grew angry, she did not argue. She waited until his voice softened again. She adjusted his pillow, offered water, and then ended the conversation not with a joke, not with advice, but with a simple sentence. "You are still a person, Mr. Keller. Not just a patient, not just a billionaire. You are allowed to feel afraid." For a man who had lived his whole life as a symbol of strength, those words landed heavier than any medicine through his veins. Do you believe that one sentence can begin to break a wall that has been built for decades? For Friedrich, that was the first crack. In the following days, he started looking at the schedule on the wall outside his room, not to see what procedure was coming next, but to see one thing. "Who is my nurse today?" If he saw unfamiliar names, his face darkened, his mood turned sour. If he saw one familiar short word, Malu, his shoulders relaxed just a little. The other nurses noticed. The doctors noticed. Even his own daughter Elise noticed that her father's voice changed when he spoke about the Filipino nurse. He did not call her a servant. He did not complain that she was too slow or too talkative. Instead, he said things like, "She listens, she prays, she does not treat me like a dying man." One evening, after a difficult procedure, when the room finally grew quiet and the hallway lights dimmed, Malu stood by the window watching the snowfall. Friedrich's voice came from the bed, weaker than usual. "Where are you from?" he asked. "From the Philippines," she answered. "From a small town you have probably never heard of." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Why would you leave your home to take care of old men like me?" She smiled sadly. "Have you ever had to leave someone you love just to give them a better life?" she asked. He did not answer. The question hung in the air. "My children are in the Philippines," she continued. "I send money home to them, to my parents, to my sisters. I take care of other people's fathers here, hoping someone is kind to my own father there." That is how life is for many Filipinos. There it was, a small confession wrapped in quiet dignity. No self-pity, no drama, just a simple truth spoken without bitterness. Friedrich turned his face slightly toward her. For a man who had always believed that loyalty was something you paid for, this kind of sacrifice, this kind of love, was something he did not quite understand yet. But it unsettled him. In a good way. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Sometimes," she admitted. "On birthdays, on Christmas, when I see a father hug his child. But regret does not pay school fees, Mr. Keller. So I pray, I work, and I hope that my children will understand one day." Have you ever felt that mix of pain and pride at the same time? That is what filled the room that night. A woman far from home, giving her strength to a stranger. A man who thought he owned the world, suddenly realizing he had never met strength like this before. From that moment, something shifted quietly in him. The man who used to shout at nurses now waited patiently when Malu said, "I will be back in minutes." The billionaire who argued with doctors now listened more when Malu repeated their explanations in simpler words, making sure he understood. He even asked her once, "Do you think God is punishing me for something?" The fact that he could ask such a question openly, without hiding behind sarcasm, surprised even himself. Day by day, one small interaction at a time, a bond began to form between the German billionaire and the Filipino nurse. A bond built on honesty, patience, and the kind of care that you cannot pay for. Because it comes from the soul, not from a contract. And yet, all of this was just the beginning. Long before the day when he would say something that would shock not only his family, not only the hospital staff, but even Malu herself. There is something almost invisible about the way a person changes. It rarely happens in a single moment. More often it happens the way dawn replaces darkness. So slowly, you only notice when the light has already filled the room. That was how Friedrich Keller's transformation began. Not with a dramatic confession, not with a miracle, but with a quiet shift in the way he watched the door each morning, hoping to see the familiar face of the Filipino nurse who had somehow softened the edges of his world. Before Malu, his expectations were simple. Nurses were employees, hospitals were facilities. Healing was something money could accelerate. But with her, those beliefs began to feel small, like old clothes that no longer fit him. He found himself wondering what made this woman different. Why did her presence calm him? Why did her voice cut through the fear that everyone else tiptoed around? One morning, after a long night of coughing and restless sleep, he woke up to see her pulling the curtains open. The early light touched her face, and she greeted him with a smile that did not ask for anything in return. "Good morning, Mr. Keller. How is your breathing now?" He surprised himself when he answered honestly that it felt tight and that the night scared him. Normally, he would have said he was fine or blamed the machines, but there was something disarming about her patience, something that made him want to put down the shields he had carried for a lifetime. As she checked his oxygen mask, she hummed a tune he did not recognize. He asked her what song it was. "A lullaby from home," she said. "My mother used to sing it when I was sick." It makes the room feel less lonely. He watched her hands move with a gentleness that felt almost impossible in a world as fast and cold as the one he had built his empire in. For the first time in months, he allowed his breathing to follow the rhythm of that old Filipino lullaby. When she walked toward the sink, he whispered something so soft she barely heard it. "Thank you, Malu." That was the moment she paused, her fingers frozen in the air for a second. He had never thanked a nurse before. Everyone knew that. The staff in the hospital cafeteria whispered about it. Doctors joked nervously about it. His own daughter had once said, "Papa does not thank people, he only pays them." Yet here he was saying, "Thank you," as if the words belonged to him. But the real shift began outside that room, because while Friedrich slowly opened up to her, Malu was learning just as much about him. She learned how he ate almost nothing unless she encouraged him. She learned that he hated sleeping because sleep meant losing control. She learned that he checked his phone constantly, even when his hands shook, not because he cared about business anymore, but because he feared the company would collapse without him. His whole life had been built on the idea that strength came from never showing weakness. And now, lying in that bed, he was discovering a different kind of strength in a place he never expected. His daughter Elise was the first to notice how her father's tone changed when Malu was around. She visited every 2 or 3 days, always in tailored suits, always carrying folders and documents. To her father was a symbol of discipline and legacy. She expected meetings, decisions, final instructions. Usually he gave them. But one afternoon when she walked in, she found him listening quietly as Malu told a story about her childhood during a typhoon. He was smiling. Elise froze in the doorway. Her father had not smiled like that in years. "What are you listening to, Papa?" she asked. He looked up as if waking from a dream. "She is telling me about her family." Normally, Elise disliked small talk, especially in this place. She wanted numbers, updates, signatures, but something about the warmth in her father's voice made her hesitate. She watched as Malu adjusted his blanket, her movements natural and confident. There was no fear in her eyes. She was not intimidated by power. She treated him as if he were a man, not a name on a Forbes list. When Malu left the room, Elise leaned closer and whispered, "Papa, do you trust her?" He answered softly, "I do." Trust, a word he had not used in decades without a contract attached. In the days that followed, she witnessed small scenes that left her more and more curious. One afternoon, she entered the room quietly and saw her father asleep. Malu was sitting by his bed reading a book aloud in a low voice. Not a medical book, not a devotional book, a simple story about a fisherman and his child. The kind of story a mother might read to comfort someone who felt lost. Another time, she saw the two of them in a quiet conversation. Her father's voice was trembling, not from physical pain, but from the weight of old memories he had locked away. Malu listened without judgment, offering a tissue when his eyes grew wet. He waved it away at first, embarrassed, but she gently placed it in his hand. That small gesture would stay with Elise for days, but the moment that truly shocked her happened on a Sunday morning. When she entered the room, she found her father holding a rosary. A rosary. The same man who had once argued with a priest during her mother's funeral because he believed that faith was a crutch for the weak. And now he held a rosary gently, almost reverently. "Where did you get that?" she asked. He looked at the small wooden beads, turning them slowly. "From Malu. She says she prays for me every night." He said it so matter-of-fact, so quietly, that Elise felt a strange tightness in her chest. She realized then what she had been sensing but could not name. This Filipino nurse was not just taking care of her father. She was changing him, and that frightened her. Later that afternoon, she pulled Malu aside near the nurse's station. "I want to ask you something," she said firmly. "What exactly are you to my father?" Malu blinked, confused. "I am his nurse." "I know that, but he listens to you." Malu lowered her eyes respectfully. "Sometimes sick people need someone who sees them as a whole person, not just a patient." Elise crossed her arms. "My father is very attached to you." Malu nodded. Some patients become attached to the person who stays with them the longest, especially when they feel afraid. But her tone was gentle, not defensive. She was used to questions like this. Filipino nurses often were. Elise hesitated, then asked the question she had been holding back. When your contract ends, you will move to another ward. Correct, yes, that is hospital policy. The answer should have comforted her. Instead, it filled her with unease, because she knew her father well enough to understand that losing Malu would not be easy for him. He was not used to losing anyone he valued, and she suddenly feared what he might do when the day came. Meanwhile, inside room 406, the bond was growing stronger. One evening, as snow fell again outside the window, Friedrich whispered something he had never told anyone. When I was a young man, I believed that success meant being untouchable, that kindness was a weakness, that showing fear meant losing the respect of others. But you make me feel human again. Malu did not speak right away. She simply placed her hand gently over his. Sometimes, she said softly, God sends us people not to fix us, but to remind us that we are still worth healing. He closed his eyes as if her words were a warm blanket over old wounds. He did not know then that the day was coming soon, the day when a new list of nurse assignments would appear on the wall, the day he would learn that Malu was being transferred to another unit, the day he would look at his daughter with a fire in his eyes she had not seen in years and say the words that would send shockwaves through the entire hospital. I will not let her go. And he meant it in the only way a billionaire knows how. There are moments in life when a quiet room suddenly becomes the center of a storm. No lightning, no thunder, just a sentence spoken softly, yet powerful enough to shake the ground beneath everyone who hears it. That was what happened the morning Friedrich Keller discovered that Malu's name was no longer on the assignment board. He had woken up earlier than usual, restless, sensing that something felt wrong. The hallway lights had just turned on, still dim and sleepy. He waited for the familiar sound of her footsteps, for the soft knock she always gave before entering. But the knock never came. Instead, a different nurse walked in. Young, nervous, too cheerful for a winter morning. Good morning, Mr. Keller. My name is... He cut her off instantly. Where is Malu? The young woman straightened her shoulders. Sir, Nurse Malu has been reassigned. Reassigned. The word hit him harder than any medical diagnosis he had received. To where? She hesitated. I'm not authorized. I will get the head nurse now. The girl hurried out. Minutes later, the head nurse arrived, calm, professional, already prepared for the confrontation. Sir, this is a standard rotation. He glared at her with eyes that once intimidated boardrooms. Rotation. Do you understand that she is the only one who can take care of me properly? I want her back. The head nurse shook her head gently. It is not possible. She has been transferred to another ward. We must follow hospital policy, hospital policy. He repeated the words slowly, as if tasting something bitter. Then he leaned back on his pillows, breathing hard, his voice a low growl. Bring my daughter now. When Elise arrived, she found him sitting upright, trembling with anger. For a moment, she thought something medical had happened, but then she saw the clipboard in his hand. The assignment list. Malu's name is missing. Papa, calm down, she said softly. What is happening? They removed her, Friedrich whispered. They took her away from me. Elise sighed, relieved it wasn't something worse. Papa, it's normal. Nurses rotate. She cannot stay with one patient forever. He turned to her with an intensity she had never seen. She is not just a nurse. She is the only person in this place who treats me like I am human. His voice cracked on the last word. Elise opened her mouth to respond but stopped, because deep down she knew he was right. She had seen it, she had felt it. Malu was the one thread holding him together, the one steady presence in a world where everything else felt like it was slipping away from him. He reached for her wrist with surprising strength. Get her back. Papa, Elise whispered, helpless. The rules are... I do not care about rules, she swallowed hard. Papa, what do you want me to do? He stared at her, his chest rising slowly, painfully, as if every breath carried decades of loneliness and pride. Then he spoke the sentence that would mark the turning point of everything that came after. If the hospital will not give her back to me, then I will buy the hospital. Elise froze. Papa, that is not... I built corporations across continents, he said. I can buy one hospital. But she knew this wasn't about power. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about ego. It was about fear, the kind of fear he had never allowed himself to admit. The fear of losing the only person who brought warmth into those cold walls. The fear of being alone again. She sat beside him, placed her hand on his and spoke gently. "Papa, you cannot buy people." He shook his head weakly. "I do not want to buy her. I want to keep the only connection I have left to being alive." The room fell silent. Machines hummed softly. Snow floated past the window as if time itself had slowed down to witness the moment. Then unexpectedly the door opened. Malu stepped inside. Elise stood up quickly. "What are you doing here?" The head nurse had allowed her to come only for a moment, just long enough to check on his vitals, to ease his distress. But the second he saw her, Friedrich's expression changed completely. The anger dissolved, the tightness in his shoulders loosened. His eyes softened the way winter softens when the first hint of spring arrives. He whispered her name like a prayer, Malu. She approached the bed, concern on her face. "So why are you forcing yourself to sit up like that? You will strain your breathing again." "You left," he said. She shook her head gently. "I was assigned to a different ward. I did not choose to leave you." The honesty behind those words pierced through him. He looked down, his voice small, almost childlike. "I cannot do this without you." For a woman accustomed to comforting the elderly, the dying, the lonely, those words hit her differently. She saw not a billionaire, not a powerful man, but a frightened human being clinging to the only lighthouse left in the storm. She pulled a chair beside him and sat down. "Sir, I'm still here for now, but you know I cannot stay by your side forever. That is how hospitals work." He closed his eyes, breathing unevenly. "I will change the rules," she smiled softly. "Some things cannot be bought, Mr. Keller." He opened his eyes slowly, meeting her gaze. "Then I will buy the things I can if it means keeping you here." Her smile faded. She felt a mix of worry, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite name. She had seen patients grow attached to her before, but this was different. This was deep. This was rooted in wounds that went far beyond illness. She reached out, placing her hand gently over his. "You do not need to buy anything. You just need to trust that you can heal with or without me." He shook his head. "I cannot." She felt a tug in her heart, a tenderness she had tried to keep professional. It broke through anyway. "Sir, you are stronger than you think." He whispered, "Then stay until I'm strong." But fate, life, policy, whatever name we give it, does not bend easily, especially not for the things that matter most. That night, while Malu returned to her new ward and Friedrich lay awake staring at the ceiling, Elise sat in her car in the parking lot, hands trembling on the steering wheel. She thought about the look in her father's eyes, the desperation, the fear, the vulnerability she never knew he was capable of. And for the first time since he fell ill, she allowed herself to wonder something she had never considered before. Was this nurse saving his life in a way no machine or medicine ever could? Inside the hospital, down one floor, Malu finished checking a patient's IV, but her thoughts kept drifting back to room 406. His voice, his eyes, the way he seemed smaller and larger at the same time, like a man who had climbed mountains but could not climb out of his own loneliness. When she stepped into the elevator, she whispered a prayer that surprised even her. "Lord, please show me what I should do," because she knew something was coming, a decision, a moment, a turning point, something that would change not only her patient's life but hers as well. There are decisions that come wrapped not in urgency, but in quiet inevitability. Decisions that feel less like choices and more like the natural direction of a story that has been unfolding long before we realized it. For Friedrich and Malu, that moment arrived on a morning when the winter sun finally broke through the clouds, lighting the hospital corridors with a soft glow that felt strangely hopeful. Friedrich had barely slept. He kept replaying the same fear in his mind, the same room without her, the same days filled with strangers who saw him as a task rather than a man. Every minute without her felt heavier. The walls felt closer, his breaths felt shorter. It was as if part of his strength had been transferred to her, and without her presence, he was left with only the shadows of a lifetime spent being both powerful and terribly alone. When Malu walked into the room that morning for a brief mandatory check, she saw the exhaustion etched into his face. The way his hands trembled slightly, the way his eyes followed her every movement, as if he feared she would vanish again. "You need rest," she whispered. "I cannot rest when I think you will not come back," he replied. She looked at him for a long moment, unsure how to answer the depth she saw in him. She had cared for hundreds of patients across continents, something deeper, older, as if two lives from opposite worlds had collided in a place neither of them expected. Just then, Elise walked in, her coat still dusted with snow, her face pale from the night she had spent thinking. She had made her decision. "Papa, we need to talk." Malu stood to leave, but Friedrich gripped her hand lightly. "Stay," he said, "please." She hesitated, then remained by his side. Elise took a breath, gathering the courage she never thought she would need with her own father. She had grown up believing he was a man made of iron. But now, seeing him like this, frail yet deeply human, she knew she could not ignore what was in front of her. "Papa," she began gently, "I know what you said yesterday about buying the hospital." He opened his mouth to respond, but she raised a hand softly. "Let me finish." She stepped closer to the bed, her voice softened. "Papa, I used to think strength meant distance. You taught me that. You taught me that leaders do not show emotion, that vulnerability is a weakness. But watching you with her," she glanced at Malu, "I realized you were never weak. You were lonely." Friedrich's eyes glistened. Elise continued, tears forming in her own. "And she is the first person I have seen in years who makes you feel less alone." Malu felt her breath catch in her throat. She looked down, swallowing hard, knowing what was coming, but not knowing how it would end. Elise turned to her. "Nurse Malu, my father needs you, not because he is wealthy, not because he is powerful, but because you see him." Malu opened her mouth, but Elise gently interrupted. "I spoke with the administration this morning." The room went utterly still. Elise inhaled, steadying herself. "They told me there is a rule. Nurses cannot remain assigned exclusively to a single patient unless what?" Friedrich asked, gripping the blanket tightly. "Unless the patient's family formally requests continuity of care due to emotional or psychological necessity. It requires signatures, approvals, statements." Friedrich leaned forward despite the pain in his chest. "Then we will sign everything, every form, every document." Elise nodded. "I already started the paperwork." For a split second, Friedrich looked as if the weight of the world had lifted off his chest, but then he looked at Malu, waiting for her reaction, because ultimately all of this depended on her. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Mr. Keller, this is not a small decision. Continuity of care means I will stay as your nurse for as long as your treatment requires. Months, maybe more. I will be moved permanently from my ward. The schedule will change, my life will change." "I know," he whispered. "I know what I'm asking." She looked at him, searching for something in his face. Not entitlement, not ownership, not pride. And what she found instead was a quiet plea. The plea of a man who had lived a life full of people, but empty of connection. Then he said something that broke open the last wall between them. "Malu, I am not asking you to stay because I am afraid to die. I'm asking you to stay because for the first time in decades, I want to live." Her breath caught. A single tear slid down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away, embarrassed. But he saw it, and for the first time in his life, Friedrich understood that tears were not a weakness. They were proof of humanity. She took a slow breath. In her heart, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility, the burden every Filipino nurse knows too well. The balance between duty and compassion, between boundaries and connection. She closed her eyes for a moment, whispered a prayer in her mind, and then finally spoke. "If I stay, it will not be because of contracts. It will not be because of money. It will be because I believe God placed me here for a reason." Friedrich nodded slowly, "Then stay for that reason." The next silence was warm, full, alive. After what felt like an eternity, she answered with a voice that shook slightly. "I will stay." The relief on his face was immediate and profound. He breathed in deeply, as if air had suddenly become easier to pull into his lungs. Elise smiled softly, wiping her own tears. But the story did not end there. Because healing is never a single moment, it is a journey. And with Malu by his side, Friedrich began to change in ways that reached far beyond the walls of that hospital room. He started eating again because she insisted, gently but firmly. He started sleeping longer because her presence calmed his mind. He started laughing, quiet, rusty laughs that surprised everyone who heard them, and he started praying. One night, as snow fell softly outside the window, Malou found him whispering the words she had once said. Sometimes God sends us people not to fix us, but to remind us we are still worth healing. She sat beside him, holding his hand gently. "Do you believe that now?" she asked. He nodded. "I do, because he sent me you." His voice cracked, and she squeezed his hand in silent reassurance. Weeks later, when his condition stabilized, the hospital director visited the room. He thanked Malu personally, saying, "We have never seen a recovery like this. You did more than medicine ever could." And one afternoon, as the sun set behind the snowy horizon, Friedrich looked at her with a softness he had never shown anyone. "You saved my life," he said. She shook her head. "God saved your life, Mr. Keller. I only stood beside you while he did." But he smiled, a smile full of humility, gratitude, and a new understanding of what truly matters in life. And as the story spread quietly among the hospital staff about the billionaire who tried to buy a hospital just to keep one Filipino nurse, the truth behind it carried a deeper message. Some people change your health. Some people change your habits. But a rare few change your heart. And sometimes those people come from the very places the world overlooks. From small towns, from humble families, from islands the world rarely pays attention to. And yet they carry a light powerful enough to soften even the hardest souls. A light called compassion, a light called faith, a light called Filipino. When Malu stepped out of the hospital that evening, the cold wind brushed her face. But her heart was warm because she knew that somewhere in that building, a man who once believed he could buy anything had finally learned the one truth money can never purchase: the presence of someone who truly cares. And in that quiet moment, she realized something even deeper. That sometimes, without meaning to, without planning it, without even understanding how, you become the miracle someone has been waiting for. Before you leave this video, let me ask you something from the heart. Have you ever met a Filipino like Malu in your own life? Someone whose kindness changed you even in the smallest way? If her story touched you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength our people carry wherever they go, then help us share it with the world. Click like so more people discover the beauty of Filipino compassion. Share this video to remind someone that dignity and faith still matter. And if you want more stories that honor the Filipino spirit, stories of courage, humility, and the miracles we create every day, then subscribe to the channel and join our growing family. Your support helps bring these stories to millions. Your voice helps lift the name of the Philippines higher. Thank you for watching, and thank you for believing in the strength of our people. I will see you in the next.